What happens when a visitor from the depths of space begins to change the very air we breathe? In the final months of 2023, as 3i Atlas traced its silent path through the outer reaches of our solar system, meteorologists around the world began noticing something deeply unsettling in their data. Weather patterns that had followed predictable cycles for centuries started exhibiting behaviours that defied every model, every algorithm, every carefully constructed understanding of how Earth's atmosphere should respond to seasonal changes. The first anomalies appeared as whispers in the data streams, subtle pressure variations detected by weather stations across the Northern Hemisphere, tiny fluctuations that individually might be dismissed as instrumental noise, but collectively they painted a picture of an atmosphere under stress, responding to influences that weren't supposed to exist. 3i Atlas hung in the darkness like a luminous wound in the fabric of space, its pale light growing slowly brighter as it approached the inner solar system. To casual observers, it appeared as nothing more than another wandering star, a cosmic curiosity that amateur astronomers might point out during backyard stargazing sessions. But to the sensitive instruments monitoring Earth's atmospheric systems, its presence seemed to whisper through the invisible networks of pressure, temperature, and electromagnetic fields that govern our planet's weather. The correlation began subtly, noticed first by Dr. Elena Martinez at the National Weather Service's Climate Prediction Center. Her routine analysis of global atmospheric pressure readings revealed patterns that shouldn't exist, synchronized pressure drops occurring simultaneously across weather stations separated by thousands of miles, with no corresponding weather fronts to explain the phenomenon. The pressure variations followed a curious rhythm, dropping and rising in cycles that lasted exactly 17 hours and 43 minutes. This timing meant nothing to atmospheric science, bore no relationship to Earth's rotation, solar heating cycles, or any known meteorological phenomenon. But it matched perfectly with the rotation period that astronomers had calculated for the cosmic wanderer, moving through the outer darkness. As autumn progressed into what should have been a predictable winter transition, the whispers in the data became unmistakable disturbances. Storm systems began forming in regions where they had no business existing, developing according to patterns that seemed to mock decades of meteorological understanding. The first impossible storm manifested over the Sahara Desert in early November, appearing as a massive thundercloud complex that emerged from clear skies with no atmospheric precursors, no moisture sources, no thermal gradients to drive its formation. Satellite imagery showed the storm system rotating in the wrong direction, counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere, violating the Coriolis effect that has governed rotating weather systems since the Earth first began spinning. Within hours, similar impossible storms were reported across the globe. A hurricane-strength cyclone formed over the Gobi Desert, drawing moisture from air so dry it shouldn't have been able to support cloud formation. Tornado warnings were issued for regions of Siberia, where the atmospheric conditions made such phenomena meteorologically impossible. Lightning storms erupted over Antarctica, illuminating the polar ice with electrical displays that painted the frozen landscape in colours that had never been seen at such latitudes. But perhaps most unsettling were the reports filtering in from rural weather stations, small monitoring posts scattered across remote regions where human observation could still capture phenomena that satellite imagery might miss. These stations recorded temperature inversions that defied physics, layers of superheated air floating above regions of near-freezing surface temperatures, creating atmospheric conditions that resembled alien worlds more than terrestrial weather patterns. The electromagnetic disturbances began appearing shortly after the pressure anomalies stabilized into their 17-hour cycles. Radio communications across multiple frequency bands experienced intermittent interference that followed no known pattern of solar activity or atmospheric propagation. GPS satellites reported positioning errors that suggested the ionosphere itself was fluctuating in ways that corrupted the satellite signals essential to modern navigation systems. Aircraft pilots began filing reports of unusual atmospheric conditions, clear air turbulence in regions where weather models predicted perfectly stable flying conditions, wind shear patterns that seemed to reverse direction without warning, and electromagnetic compass deviations that suggested local magnetic field disturbances of unknown origin. The biological indicators proved equally disturbing. Migratory birds, operating according to instincts refined across millions of years of evolution, began altering their traditional flight paths. Entire flocks of geese, following routes that should have taken them southeast for winter, instead began flying in seemingly random directions, as if their internal navigation systems had been disrupted by forces they couldn't understand. Marine life exhibited similar behavioural anomalies. Deep-sea creatures that typically remain in the abyssal depths began surfacing in numbers unprecedented in recorded oceanographic history. Whales altered their migration routes, abandoning feeding grounds they had visited for generations to travel toward regions that offered no obvious benefits. Commercial fishing operations reported catches containing species that shouldn't exist at those depths, at those temperatures, in those locations. Atmospheric chemists detected subtle but consistent changes in the composition of air samples collected from monitoring stations worldwide. Trace gases that normally remained in stable concentrations began fluctuating in patterns that correlated with the 17-hour pressure cycles. The changes were minute, measured in parts per million, but their global synchronization suggested atmospheric processes operating on the scales that transcended local weather phenomena. The aurora displays began appearing in the second week of November, visible at latitudes where such phenomena should have been impossible. Northern lights illuminated skies above Mexico, southern Brazil and central Africa, regions where the Earth's magnetic field configuration should have prevented any interaction with solar particles. But these weren't typical auroras. Instead of the familiar green and blue curtains of light, these displays showed deep reds, purples, and silver patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the atmospheric pressure cycles. Professional meteorologists found themselves consulting historical records, searching for precedents that might explain the extraordinary conditions they were observing. The data revealed isolated instances of unusual weather associated with the appearances of bright comets and asteroids, but nothing approached the scope and intensity of the atmospheric disturbances accompanying the cosmic wanderer's approach. Temperature monitoring stations recorded the most dramatic anomalies. Regions that should have been experiencing typical seasonal cooling instead registered sudden temperature spikes that lasted exactly 17 hours before returning to expected ranges. Conversely, tropical areas began experiencing cold snaps that brought frost to ecosystems that hadn't seen freezing temperatures in recorded history. The precision of these temperature variations suggested external forcing mechanisms operating with mathematical accuracy that natural weather systems simply don't display. Regional climate patterns that normally fluctuate according to complex chaotic dynamics instead began exhibiting behaviours that resembled controlled responses to systematic influences. Agricultural monitoring networks detected the ripple effects of these atmospheric anomalies. Crops that should have been entering winter dormancy instead began showing signs of renewed growth activity. Fruit trees in northern latitudes started producing unseasonable blooms, while tropical plants began exhibiting stress responses typically associated with extreme cold exposure. The 17-hour cycle became impossible to ignore, as more monitoring systems detected its influence across multiple atmospheric parameters. Barometric pressure, electromagnetic field strength, atmospheric electrical activity, and even seismic measurements showed synchronized variations that followed the cosmic wanderer's calculated rotation period with mathematical precision. Weather prediction models, refined through decades of atmospheric research and computational advancement, began producing forecasts that bore no resemblance to observed conditions. Computer simulations that should have predicted storm formation, temperature patterns, and precipitation probability instead generated outputs that meteorologists described as atmospheric chaos, conditions so far outside normal parameters that the models couldn't process them. But it was the silence that proved most unsettling. The usual background noise of atmospheric activity, the random electromagnetic signatures generated by countless storm systems, pressure fronts and thermal interactions began to fade during certain portions of the 17-hour cycles. For precisely 43 minutes during each cycle, atmospheric monitoring stations detected what could only be described as unnatural quiet, as if the entire planet's weather system was holding its breath. During these periods of atmospheric silence, the aurora displays intensified, painting the sky in patterns that seemed to follow geometric designs rather than the chaotic beauty typical of natural aurora phenomena. The patterns appeared to be responding to something, communicating through electromagnetic displays that reached from the upper atmosphere down to ground-level detection equipment. Satellite imagery during these quiet periods revealed another disturbing phenomenon: cloud formations that arranged themselves in geometric patterns visible from orbit. These weren't random formations shaped by wind patterns and thermal gradients. They were organized structures that maintained their shapes for hours at a time, creating atmospheric art that defied meteorological explanation. The economic impacts became apparent as transportation systems struggled to adapt to unpredictable weather conditions. Airlines cancelled thousands of flights due to atmospheric disturbances that weather radar couldn't detect until aircraft encountered them directly. Shipping companies rerouted vessels to avoid storm systems that formed and dissipated according to no recognizable pattern. Emergency management agencies began receiving reports of weather phenomena that didn't fit into any existing classification system. Hailstones that fell in geometric shapes rather than random ice formations. Raindrops that seemed to fall upward for brief moments before gravity reasserted control. Snow that accumulated in patterns that resembled mathematical equations more than natural drifting. The atmospheric pressure network detected another troubling phenomenon: pressure waves that seemed to originate from points in the upper atmosphere and propagate downward toward Earth's surface. These weren't caused by any known meteorological process. They resembled pressure signatures that might be generated by massive objects moving through the atmosphere, except they originated at altitudes where no such objects existed. As December approached and the cosmic wanderer continued its relentless approach toward the inner solar system, the atmospheric anomalies began to intensify. The 17-hour cycles became more pronounced, the electromagnetic disturbances more widespread, and the impossible weather events more frequent and dramatic. Weather forecasters found themselves in the unprecedented position of being unable to predict conditions more than a few hours in advance. Atmospheric systems that should have remained stable for days instead changed character within minutes, transforming from calm conditions to severe weather, and back again according to no pattern that meteorological science could explain. The correlation between the cosmic visitor's position and the intensity of atmospheric disturbances became undeniable. As the wanderer moved closer to Earth's orbital path, the weather anomalies increased in frequency and magnitude. When it passed through regions of space that aligned with Earth's magnetic field lines, the aurora displays intensified. When its trajectory carried it through the plane of Earth's orbit, pressure systems worldwide seemed to respond with synchronized fluctuations. But perhaps most unsettling was the growing evidence that Earth's atmosphere wasn't simply being influenced by the cosmic wanderer's presence. It seemed to be responding to it, as if the planet's weather systems were attempting to communicate with the visitor through electromagnetic displays, pressure variations, and atmospheric chemistry changes that created a kind of meteorological language. The implications stretched far beyond meteorology into realms that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between cosmic and terrestrial phenomena. If a single interstellar object could disrupt global weather patterns with such precision and apparent purpose, then Earth's atmospheric systems might be far more sensitive to cosmic influences than anyone had previously imagined. Do you think the strange weather that began with the cosmic wanderer's arrival was simple coincidence, or was Earth's atmosphere responding to the presence of something it recognized? As winter officially arrived but brought with it weather that belonged to no season, meteorologists around the world faced an unsettling realization. The rules governing Earth's atmospheric behavior might be far more complex than human science had discovered, influenced by cosmic relationships that extended far beyond the simple gravitational dance between Earth, Moon, and Sun. The cosmic wanderer continued its silent approach, and with each passing day the skies above our world grew more restless, more unpredictable, and more seemingly aware of the visitor that moved through the darkness toward whatever cosmic appointment awaited in the depths of our solar system. To understand how a cosmic wanderer might disturb Earth's atmospheric rhythms, we must first acknowledge a truth that ancient civilizations understood intuitively. Our planet's weather has never been a purely terrestrial phenomenon. Every breath of wind, every drop of rain, every shift in atmospheric pressure occurs within an intricate dance between Earth and the cosmic forces that surround us. The Moon, our closest celestial companion, provides the most obvious example of cosmic influence on terrestrial systems. Its gravitational embrace doesn't merely lift and lower the oceans in the familiar rhythm of tides, It pulls at every molecule of water on Earth's surface, including the vast quantities of moisture suspended in our atmosphere. As the Moon waxes and wanes through its monthly cycle, atmospheric pressure systems respond with subtle but measurable changes. The same gravitational forces that create spring tides during new and full moons also create atmospheric tides, drawing columns of air toward the Moon's position and creating pressure variations that influence weather patterns across the globe. Meteorologists have documented how hurricane formation rates fluctuate according to lunar phases, with tropical storm development showing statistical preferences for specific points in the lunar cycle. The Moon's gravitational influence affects atmospheric pressure by amounts measured in mere millibars, yet these tiny variations can determine whether atmospheric conditions remain stable or trigger the formation of massive storm systems. But the Moon's influence extends beyond simple gravitational effects. Its position relative to Earth and Sun creates electromagnetic interactions that influence the planet's ionosphere, the upper atmospheric layer where solar radiation strips electrons from gas molecules, creating a shell of charged particles that surrounds our world. The ionosphere serves as Earth's electromagnetic interface with space, responding to solar activity, cosmic radiation, and the complex magnetic field interactions between Earth and Moon. Changes in ionospheric conditions affect radio wave propagation, GPS satellite accuracy, and the formation of aurora displays. But they also influence atmospheric chemistry and electrical activity that can cascade down through the atmosphere to affect ground-level weather patterns. The Sun, of course, serves as the primary driver of all weather phenomena through its role as Earth's energy source. But solar influence on climate operates through mechanisms far more complex than simple heating and cooling cycles. The Sun's magnetic field undergoes constant changes, creating variations in the solar wind, the stream of charged particles that flows constantly from the Sun's surface toward the outer reaches of the solar system. When solar wind intensity fluctuates, Earth's magnetosphere responds with corresponding changes in magnetic field strength and configuration. These magnetospheric variations influence atmospheric electrical activity, affecting cloud formation processes, precipitation patterns, and the global distribution of atmospheric pressure systems. Solar activity follows multiple overlapping cycles, from the familiar 11-year sunspot cycle to longer-term variations that span centuries. Each cycle brings changes in solar radiation intensity, magnetic field strength, and particle emission rates that influence Earth's climate in ways that scientists are still working to understand fully. During periods of high solar activity, increased cosmic ray bombardment affects cloud formation by providing the ionization needed to create cloud condensation nuclei, the microscopic particles around which water vapor condenses to form clouds. More cosmic rays generally lead to increased cloud formation, which can cool global temperatures by reflecting more sunlight back to space. Conversely, when solar activity is high, the stronger solar magnetic field deflects more cosmic rays away from Earth, reducing cloud formation and potentially contributing to atmospheric warming. This cosmic ray cloud connection represents one of many mechanisms through which solar variations influence terrestrial weather patterns on timescales ranging from years to centuries. But cosmic influences on Earth's weather extend far beyond our immediate solar system neighbours. The entire solar system moves through the galaxy in a complex orbital dance that exposes Earth to varying levels of galactic cosmic radiation, interstellar magnetic fields, and gravitational influences from distant stellar neighbours. As our solar system orbits the galactic centre, it passes through regions of space with different characteristics, areas of higher stellar density, interstellar dust clouds, and varying magnetic field strengths. These galactic environmental changes occur over timescales of millions of years, but they influence the solar system's overall cosmic environment and the long-term evolution of Earth's climate. Recent research has revealed that Earth's passage through specific galactic regions correlates with long-term climate variations, ice age cycles, and even mass extinction events recorded in the geological record. The cosmic environment surrounding our solar system isn't static. It changes as we move through the galaxy, bringing new influences that can affect atmospheric chemistry, cosmic ray exposure levels, and the solar wind conditions that help shape Earth's magnetosphere. Interstellar magnetic fields also play a role in modulating the cosmic radiation environment around Earth. When the solar system encounters regions of space with stronger interstellar magnetic fields, the additional shielding can reduce cosmic ray bombardment and influence atmospheric chemistry in ways that affect cloud formation and climate patterns. The gravitational influences of other planets in our solar system create additional layers of complexity in Earth's cosmic environment. Jupiter, with its massive gravitational field, acts as both a shield and a disruptor, deflecting some asteroids and comets away from the inner solar system, while occasionally redirecting others toward Earth's vicinity. The gravitational dance between the outer planets creates what astronomers call orbital resonances, mathematical relationships that can amplify or dampen the effects of passing objects. When cosmic visitors enter our solar system, their trajectories and influences are modified by these gravitational relationships, potentially amplifying their effects on the inner planets. Electromagnetic phenomena throughout the solar system also influence Earth's atmospheric behaviour. The solar wind carries the sun's magnetic field throughout the solar system, creating a complex web of electromagnetic interactions between planets, moons, and any objects moving through interplanetary space. When cosmic visitors like comets or asteroids pass through this electromagnetic environment, they can create disturbances that propagate throughout the solar system's magnetic field network. These disturbances can reach Earth as variations in solar wind conditions, magnetospheric fluctuations, and ionospheric disturbances that cascade down through the atmosphere to influence surface weather patterns. The timing and intensity of these cosmic influences depend on complex factors, including the visitor's size, composition, electromagnetic properties, and trajectory relative to the existing magnetic field lines that thread through interplanetary space. Large metallic objects can create particularly significant disturbances by disrupting the solar wind flow and creating electromagnetic wakes that extend far beyond the object itself. Historical records provide evidence of these cosmic terrestrial connections stretching back centuries. Chinese astronomical texts document correlations between comet appearances and unusual weather patterns, including droughts, floods, and unseasonable storms that followed the passage of bright comets through the inner solar system. European chronicles from medieval times describe similar correlations, with bright celestial visitors often followed by years of agricultural disruption, extreme weather events, and climate anomalies that affected entire continents. While some of these historical correlations might reflect coincidence or selective reporting, the consistency of such accounts across different cultures and time periods suggests genuine physical connections between cosmic events and terrestrial climate. Modern atmospheric science has identified several mechanisms through which cosmic objects might influence Earth's weather systems. Large objects passing through the solar system can create gravitational perturbations that affect the Earth-Moon system, altering tidal forces and atmospheric pressure variations in ways that influence storm formation and ocean circulation patterns. Metallic or electrically active objects can disrupt interplanetary magnetic fields, creating electromagnetic disturbances that propagate to Earth and influence ionospheric conditions, atmospheric electrical activity, and the formation of aurora displays. These electromagnetic effects can cascade down through the atmosphere, affecting cloud formation, precipitation patterns, and regional climate variations. Objects with significant mass can also influence Earth's orbit and rotational dynamics in subtle ways, creating small changes in seasonal timing, solar radiation distribution, and atmospheric circulation patterns that can trigger larger climate responses through feedback mechanisms in the Earth's complex climate system. The composition of cosmic visitors adds another layer of potential influence. Objects containing unusual materials or radioactive elements can affect atmospheric chemistry when they pass close to Earth, introducing trace compounds that serve as cloud condensation nuclei or that participate in complex atmospheric chemical reactions. Even the gravitational effects of large cosmic objects can influence atmospheric dynamics by creating tidal effects in the atmosphere itself. Just as the Moon creates atmospheric tides, a massive interstellar visitor could generate atmospheric tidal effects that create pressure variations, wind pattern changes, and thermal redistributions that influence weather formation across the globe. The duration and intensity of these cosmic influences depend on factors including the visitor's trajectory, its closest approach, distance to Earth, the duration of its passage through the inner solar system, and its electromagnetic and gravitational characteristics. Objects that remain in the inner solar system for extended periods can create sustained atmospheric disturbances that persist for months or years. But perhaps most significantly, the Earth's atmospheric system exists in a state of dynamic equilibrium that can be sensitive to even small external influences. Climate scientists have documented how minor perturbations in atmospheric conditions can trigger cascading effects that lead to major changes in weather patterns, seasonal timing, and regional climate characteristics. This atmospheric sensitivity means that cosmic influences don't need to be dramatic to create significant terrestrial effects. Small changes in solar wind conditions, minor variations in cosmic ray bombardment, or subtle gravitational perturbations can initiate atmospheric responses that amplify through feedback mechanisms to create major weather anomalies. The 17-hour cycle observed in connection with the Cosmic Wanderer's presence represents exactly the kind of external forcing that could drive such atmospheric responses. If the visitor possesses electromagnetic properties, gravitational characteristics, or other physical features that interact with Earth's magnetic field or atmospheric system on a 17-hour rotation cycle, those interactions could create the synchronized pressure variations and electromagnetic disturbances that meteorologists have documented. The precision of the observed correlations suggests that the Cosmic Wanderer might possess characteristics that make it particularly effective at influencing Earth's atmospheric system. Its size, composition, electromagnetic properties, or trajectory might create optimal conditions for generating the kind of systematic atmospheric disturbances that have been observed since its approach began. But the scope and intensity of the documented weather anomalies also suggest that the cosmic visitor might represent something beyond the typical range of cosmic objects that occasionally pass through our solar system. The systematic nature of its apparent influence on Earth's atmosphere, the precision of the 17-hour correlations, and the global scope of the atmospheric responses all point toward characteristics that transcend normal expectations for interstellar debris. What happens when Earth's sensitive atmospheric system encounters a cosmic visitor that possesses properties specifically designed to interact with planetary environments? The answer to that question might explain why the Cosmic Wanderer's approach has coincided with weather patterns that seem to respond not just to its gravitational or electromagnetic influence, but to its very presence in our cosmic neighbourhood, as if our planet's atmospheric systems recognise something familiar in this visitor from the depths of interstellar space and are attempting to communicate through the only language they know, the ancient vocabulary of wind, storm, and sky. In the language of meteorology, there exists a phrase that should never appear in professional weather reports: impossible storm formation. Yet as the Cosmic Wanderer continued its approach through our solar system, this forbidden terminology began appearing in internal communications between weather services worldwide, whispered acknowledgements that the storms they were observing violated fundamental principles of atmospheric physics. The first impossible storm materialized over the Atacama Desert on a November morning when satellite imagery showed clear skies stretching endlessly across the Chilean highlands. Within 17 minutes, a supercell thunderstorm erupted from conditions so dry that atmospheric moisture readings barely registered above zero. The storm appeared not as a gradual build-up of atmospheric instability, but as a sudden manifestation of organized violence that seemed to draw energy from sources invisible to conventional meteorological observation. What made this storm truly impossible wasn't just its location, but its behavior. Time-lapse satellite footage revealed rotation patterns that defied the Coriolis effect, with the storm's core spinning clockwise in the southern hemisphere, the wrong direction according to every principle of atmospheric dynamics. More unsettling still, the rotation rate matched precisely the 17-hour and 43-minute period that astronomers had calculated for the Cosmic Wanderer's spin cycle. The storm's electrical activity generated another layer of impossibility. Lightning strikes occurred at precisely regular intervals, creating electromagnetic pulses that registered on radio astronomy equipment thousands of miles away. Instead of the chaotic, random discharge patterns typical of thunderstorm electrical activity, the lightning followed geometric sequences, forming patterns in the sky that resembled mathematical progressions more than natural weather phenomena. Rainfall from the storm presented its own mysteries. Water samples collected from the brief but intense precipitation contained isotope ratios that didn't match local groundwater, atmospheric moisture, or any known terrestrial water source. The isotopic signatures suggested the storm had somehow accessed water from sources that had been isolated from Earth's normal hydrological cycle for millions of years, as if drawing moisture from ancient underground reservoirs that had never seen the surface. But perhaps most disturbing were the reports from meteorological instruments within the storm itself. Weather balloons released into the system transmitted data that painted a picture of atmospheric conditions that shouldn't exist, temperature gradients that increased with altitude instead of decreasing, air pressure readings that fluctuated in patterns that matched no known atmospheric model, and electromagnetic measurements that indicated the storm was generating its own magnetic field, independent of Earth's magnetosphere. The storm's dissipation proved as mysterious as its formation. After exactly 17 hours and 43 minutes of intense activity, the system simply vanished. Not gradually weakening according to normal storm life cycle patterns, but disappearing as if someone had turned off a switch. Satellite imagery showed the transition from violent thunderstorm to clear desert air occurred within a single frame of time-lapse footage, leaving no trace except the geometric patterns that lightning had etched into the desert sand. Similar impossible storms began manifesting worldwide as the cosmic wanderer's approach continued. The Gobi Desert experienced a blizzard that deposited snow in temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, with the snow refusing to melt despite the blazing heat. Meteorologists struggled to explain how ice crystals could remain stable in conditions that should have vaporized them instantly. The snowflakes themselves defied crystallographic principles. Instead of the hexagonal symmetry that governs all natural snow crystal formation, these formations displayed geometric patterns that incorporated mathematical relationships found in advanced physics equations. When examined under electron microscopy, the crystal structures revealed levels of organizational complexity that seemed designed rather than naturally formed. Australia's Great Victoria Desert hosted a hurricane that formed over land with no moisture source, no thermal gradient, and no atmospheric instability to drive its development. The storm's eye wall contained perfectly calm air that registered temperatures nearly 20 degrees cooler than the surrounding desert, creating a localized Arctic environment in the heart of one of Earth's most arid regions. The hurricane's winds carved spiral patterns into the desert surface that matched the mathematical relationships governing galaxy formation, as if the storm was expressing cosmic organizational principles through terrestrial atmospheric dynamics. Aboriginal communities in the region reported that the storm's sound, the deep rhythmic howling of wind through its organized structure, matched traditional songs about sky spirits visiting the Earth. Tornado formations began occurring in regions where such phenomena were meteorologically impossible. A funnel cloud touched down in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, creating a path of destruction that followed a perfectly straight line for over 200 kilometers, ignoring the topographical variations that should have disrupted its trajectory. The tornado's winds exhibited laminar flow characteristics, moving in organized layers that maintained distinct velocities and temperatures, defying the chaotic turbulence that defines all natural tornado behavior. Even more puzzling, the forest vegetation in the tornado's path wasn't destroyed but rearranged. Trees were uprooted and replanted in geometric patterns, with spacing and orientation that created mandala-like formations visible from satellite imagery. The replanted vegetation showed no signs of transplant shock and continued growing as if nothing had disturbed their root systems. Arctic regions experienced their own impossible weather phenomena. A heat dome formed over northern Greenland, creating temperatures that exceeded 30 degrees Celsius while maintaining stable atmospheric conditions that prevented the normal convective processes that should have dispersed such extreme warming. The heat dome's boundaries were perfectly circular, maintained precise temperature differentials across its edges, and persisted for exactly 17 days and 17 hours before dissipating. The localized warming triggered ice melt patterns that revealed geometric formations carved into the bedrock beneath the ice sheet. These formations appeared to be ancient, predating human civilization by thousands of years, yet their mathematical precision suggested intelligent design rather than natural geological processes. Glaciologists noted that the formations resembled astronomical diagrams, with proportions that matched the orbital relationships between planets in our solar system. Lightning storms erupted over the poles, regions where electrical storm activity is virtually unknown due to the atmospheric conditions that prevail at extreme latitudes. These polar lightning displays generated electromagnetic signatures that registered on radio telescopes as far away as Australia, creating interference patterns that disrupted deep space communication networks. The polar lightning exhibited colours never documented in atmospheric electrical phenomena. Instead of the familiar blue-white discharges of normal lightning, these displays showed deep purples, silver streams, and colours that seemed to shift through spectra beyond visible light. The electromagnetic signatures suggested the lightning was accessing energy sources that extended beyond the atmospheric electrical potentials typically available to storm systems. Tropical regions experienced winter conditions that defied seasonal patterns and climatic zones. Snow fell in the Amazon basin for the first time in recorded history, accumulating in layers that formed geometric patterns across the rainforest canopy. The snow crystals maintained their structure in temperatures that should have melted them instantly, suggesting they were composed of materials that resembled ice but possessed different physical properties. The Amazon snowfall coincided with unusual behaviour among rainforest wildlife. Animals that had never encountered snow began exhibiting behaviours that suggested familiarity with winter conditions, building shelters, hoarding food, and altering their activity patterns as if responding to seasonal cues that shouldn't exist in tropical environments. Ocean storm systems began exhibiting characteristics that challenged oceanographic understanding. Hurricanes formed over cold water masses that lacked the thermal energy needed to drive tropical cyclone development. These storms drew their energy from sources that remained unidentifiable, maintaining their intensity while passing over sea surface temperatures that should have caused rapid weakening. Maritime weather monitoring stations detected electromagnetic anomalies associated with these impossible ocean storms. The storms generated magnetic field disturbances that affected compass readings on ships hundreds of miles away from the storm centres. Radio communications became disrupted in patterns that suggested the storms were broadcasting organised electromagnetic signals, rather than producing the random interference typical of severe weather systems. Ship crews reported visual phenomena associated with these ocean storms that defied conventional meteorological experience. The storm clouds displayed internal illumination that pulsed in regular patterns, creating lighthouse-like beacons that seemed to communicate with each other across vast distances. The illumination colours shifted through sequences that crew members described as resembling mathematical progressions, rather than random atmospheric electrical activity. The 17-hour correlation became impossible to ignore, as more storm systems exhibited this precise timing relationship. Meteorological databases worldwide showed that unusual storm formation, intensification, and dissipation events clustered around specific points in the cosmic wanderer's rotation cycle. The correlation was so precise that some weather forecasters began using the astronomical data to predict when and where impossible storms might manifest. But perhaps most unsettling was the discovery that these storms seemed to be responding to each other across continental distances. When an impossible storm formed in one region of the world, corresponding atmospheric disturbances would appear in geometrically related locations, points on the Earth's surface that formed triangular or pentagonal patterns when connected on global maps. The storm communication network suggested a level of atmospheric organisation that transcended individual weather systems. Instead of isolated, anomalous events, the impossible storms appeared to be components of a global atmospheric response system that was activating in response to the cosmic wanderer's presence. Agricultural regions experienced storm phenomena that directly threatened food production systems. Hailstorms deposited ice formations that weren't spherical or irregularly shaped like normal hail, but geometric structures that resembled crystalline architecture. The geometric hail maintained its complex shapes even after impact, creating fields covered with structures that looked more like scattered jewellery than storm debris. Farmers reported that crops in areas affected by impossible storms exhibited unusual growth patterns. Plants that should have been damaged or destroyed by severe weather instead showed accelerated growth, altered coloration, and fruit production that occurred outside normal seasonal cycles. Soil analysis revealed mineral compositions that didn't match regional geology, suggesting the storms had somehow introduced materials from unknown sources. The economic impact of impossible storms began affecting global supply chains as transportation networks struggled to adapt to weather phenomena that couldn't be predicted using conventional forecasting methods. Airlines cancelled flights not because of dangerous weather conditions, but because their instruments couldn't interpret the atmospheric data being generated by impossible storm systems. Shipping companies rerouted vessels to avoid ocean areas where impossible storms were manifesting, but the storm's unpredictable formation patterns made navigation planning increasingly difficult. Maritime insurance companies began developing new policy categories to address weather phenomena that fell outside traditional risk assessment models. Emergency management agencies found themselves preparing for disasters that had no historical precedents. How do you evacuate populations for storms that can form instantaneously? How do you provide shelter for weather events that create their own environmental conditions? How do you communicate safety information about phenomena that don't behave according to any known patterns? The psychological impact on meteorologists and atmospheric scientists proved as significant as the physical effects of the storms themselves. Career professionals found their expertise challenged by phenomena that rendered decades of atmospheric knowledge inadequate. Weather prediction models that had been refined through years of research became unreliable when confronted with storm systems that operated according to principles that atmospheric science couldn't explain. But buried within the chaos of impossible weather patterns, some meteorologists began detecting underlying organizational principles that suggested the storms weren't random anomalies, but components of a larger atmospheric response system. The 17-hour timing, the geometric formation patterns, and the electromagnetic communication between storm systems all pointed toward coordination rather than coincidence. As December approached and the Cosmic Wanderer moved closer to its point of nearest approach to Earth, the impossible storms began to intensify and multiply, creating weather conditions that seemed to anticipate rather than simply respond to the visitor's continuing journey through our solar system. What happens when Earth's atmosphere begins generating storms that seem designed to communicate with something approaching from the depths of space? The answer was being written in lightning patterns across the sky, carved in geometric formations across desert surfaces, and whispered in the electromagnetic signals that impossible storms were broadcasting toward the darkness where the Cosmic Wanderer continued its patient approach toward whatever cosmic appointment awaited in the heart of our solar system. On the night of November 23rd, residents of Mexico City looked up to see something that should have been impossible. Curtains of ethereal light dancing across the southern sky, painting the darkness with colors that had never illuminated the Valley of Mexico in recorded history. The aurora borealis, confined by the laws of physics to regions within 30 degrees of the magnetic poles, was somehow manifesting at latitudes where Earth's magnetic field configuration made such phenomena categorically impossible. But this wasn't simply a case of unusual aurora visibility extending beyond normal ranges. These lights possessed characteristics that challenged fundamental understanding of how auroras form, behave, and interact with Earth's magnetosphere. Instead of the flowing organic patterns typical of polar auroras, these displays showed geometric precision, mathematical relationships, and synchronized behaviors that resembled technological broadcasts more than natural atmospheric phenomena. The Mexico City aurora began as a single point of deep red light that appeared suddenly in the southern sky, growing within minutes to encompass an area spanning nearly 40 degrees of the horizon. The expansion followed a perfectly circular pattern, with the light's intensity increasing in concentric rings that pulsed outward at regular intervals. Each pulse lasted exactly 17 seconds, creating a rhythmic light display that observers described as hypnotic, almost musical in its precise timing. As the circular aurora expanded, internal structures began to manifest within the light display. Geometric patterns emerged from the red glow, triangular formations, pentagonal structures, and complex mathematical relationships that seemed to shift and evolve as the aurora continued its synchronized pulsing. These weren't random variations in light intensity, but organized patterns that suggested the aurora was expressing information through electromagnetic radiation visible to the human eye. Professional aurora researchers who traveled to Mexico to observe the phenomenon found their instruments recording data that contradicted established models of aurora formation. The electromagnetic signatures indicated the light display was being generated at altitudes between 50 and 80 kilometers above Earth's surface, well below the 100-kilometer altitude where auroras typically form. in atmospheric layers too dense to support the particle interactions that create natural aurora phenomena. Even more puzzling, the Mexico City aurora was producing electromagnetic frequencies that extended far beyond the normal range of aurora emissions. Radio telescopes detected signals spanning from extremely low frequency ranges typically associated with Earth's natural electromagnetic resonance, all the way through radio frequencies used for satellite communications and into ranges that approached visible light wavelengths. The aurora's magnetic field measurements revealed another impossibility. Natural auroras result from interactions between solar wind particles and Earth's magnetosphere, creating light displays that follow the planet's magnetic field lines. But the Mexico City aurora was generating its own magnetic field, one that existed independently of Earth's geomagnetic environment and seemed to be drawing energy from sources that remained unidentifiable. Atmospheric chemists analysing air samples collected during the aurora display detected trace elements that shouldn't exist in Earth's upper atmosphere. Rare isotopes typically found only in cosmic dust, exotic particles that suggested interactions with materials from outside our solar system, and chemical compounds that required energy levels far exceeding anything available through normal atmospheric processes. Similar impossible aurora displays began manifesting across the globe as the Cosmic Wanderer continued its approach toward the inner solar system. São Paulo, Brazil experienced auroras that painted the sky in silver and purple hues, with light patterns that seemed to respond to the city's electromagnetic environment, growing brighter over areas with higher electrical activity and dimming over regions with less electronic infrastructure. The São Paulo auroras exhibited behavioural characteristics that suggested awareness of the urban environment below. The light patterns would intensify over major transportation corridors, pulse in synchronization with power grid fluctuations, and form concentrated displays above communication towers and broadcasting facilities. It was as if the aurora was attempting to interface with human technological infrastructure, seeking connection through electromagnetic compatibility. Cairo witnessed aurora displays that incorporated colours never documented in natural aurora phenomena. Deep gold light mixed with brilliant turquoise, creating patterns that seemed to mirror the geometric relationships found in ancient Egyptian architecture. The aurora formations above the city arranged themselves into triangular configurations that aligned precisely with the orientation of the pyramids at Giza, as if the atmospheric light display was responding to architectural landmarks thousands of years old. Local residents reported that the Cairo auroras were accompanied by subtle electromagnetic effects that influenced electronic devices throughout the city. Mobile phones received text messages consisting entirely of geometric symbols. Radio stations experienced interference that, when analysed, revealed mathematical sequences embedded in the electromagnetic disruption. Television broadcasts showed brief overlays of geometric patterns that appeared and disappeared too quickly for conscious recognition, but left viewers with the unsettling impression that the aurora was attempting to communicate. The timing correlation between aurora appearances and the Cosmic Wanderer's position became undeniably precise as more displays manifested worldwide. Each aurora outbreak began exactly 17 hours and 43 minutes after the previous display ended, creating a global network of atmospheric light shows that followed the cosmic visitor's rotation period with mathematical accuracy. But perhaps most remarkable was the discovery that these impossible auroras weren't isolated phenomena. They were communicating with each other across continental distances. Radio astronomy facilities detected electromagnetic pulses travelling between aurora display locations, creating a global communication network that operated through the upper atmosphere and seemed to coordinate the timing, intensity, and patterns of light shows appearing thousands of miles apart. Beijing experienced auroras that incorporated geometric patterns resembling ancient Chinese astronomical symbols, with light formations that seemed to reference traditional star charts and celestial navigation diagrams. The aurora display above the city created patterns that aligned with the architectural principles governing the layout of the Forbidden City, suggesting the atmospheric phenomena were somehow accessing and expressing cultural information that had been encoded in the built environment centuries earlier. The Beijing auroras demonstrated another impossible characteristic. They appeared to be learning. Night after night, the light patterns became more complex, incorporating new geometric relationships and mathematical progressions that suggested the aurora was developing increasingly sophisticated methods of visual communication. By the end of the first week, the patterns had evolved to include symbols that resembled written language, though no linguist could identify the alphabet or grammatical structure being expressed. London's aurora displays manifested in deep green and blue hues that painted the night sky above the Thames with patterns that seemed to follow the city's electromagnetic infrastructure. The lights traced the routes of underground train lines, outlined the shapes of major bridges, and created geometric formations that matched the street grid patterns of central London districts. But the London auroras also began exhibiting temporal anomalies that challenged conventional understanding of electromagnetic phenomena. Observers reported that the light patterns seemed to be displaying information about future events, forming configurations that resembled weather maps showing storm systems that wouldn't arrive for several days, or creating patterns that anticipated changes in the city's electrical grid before those changes had been officially announced. Antarctic research stations reported aurora displays occurring at ground level, with electromagnetic phenomena manifesting within the atmospheric boundary layer rather than in the upper atmosphere where auroras typically form. These ground-level auroras created localized electromagnetic environments that affected compass readings, radio communications, and electronic equipment within a radius of several kilometers. The Antarctic phenomena generated additional mysteries when researchers discovered that the ground-level auroras were creating patterns in the ice that persisted long after the light displays ended. Geometric formations appeared in the surface ice, carved with precision that suggested controlled energy application, rather than random electromagnetic effects. The ice patterns formed mathematical relationships that resembled astronomical diagrams, with proportions that matched planetary orbital mechanics within our solar system. Australian observers documented auroras that appeared to be interfacing with the continent's unique geological characteristics. The light displays showed preferences for areas with specific mineral compositions, growing brighter over regions containing iron ore deposits and dimming over areas with different geological features. This selective behavior suggested the auroras were somehow detecting and responding to Earth's internal structure through electromagnetic interactions that extended deep into the planet's crust. The aurora patterns above Australia also demonstrated awareness of the continent's indigenous astronomical traditions. Light formations frequently matched constellation patterns, significant to Aboriginal cultures, created geometric relationships found in traditional rock art, and expressed mathematical proportions that appeared in Dreamtime stories about sky spirits and celestial navigation. Solar observatories worldwide confirmed that the impossible aurora displays weren't correlated with increased solar activity. Solar wind measurements, solar flare monitoring, and magnetic field observations all indicated that the Sun was exhibiting normal activity levels that shouldn't support aurora formation beyond polar regions. The energy driving these impossible light displays was coming from sources other than solar particle interactions with Earth's magnetosphere. Ionospheric monitoring stations detected unprecedented electromagnetic activity during aurora events, with the upper atmosphere exhibiting electrical behaviors that suggested artificial stimulation rather than natural solar wind interactions. The ionosphere was somehow being energized by sources that remained invisible to conventional astronomical observation, creating atmospheric electrical conditions that enabled aurora formation at impossible latitudes and altitudes. The 17-hour cycle governing aurora appearances became so predictable that amateur astronomers began using the timing to plan observation sessions. Photography clubs organized aurora watching events based on the Cosmic Wanderer's rotation schedule, and social media networks developed dedicated channels for sharing images and reports of the impossible light displays. But the photographic evidence revealed details that visual observation couldn't detect. Long exposure images showed that the auroras were creating persistent patterns in the electromagnetic environment, leaving traces that remained visible for hours after the light displays ended. These electromagnetic afterimages formed networks connecting different aurora locations, creating a global grid of electromagnetic connections that seemed to be building towards some kind of atmospheric infrastructure. Time-lapse photography revealed that the aurora patterns were evolving according to mathematical progressions, with each display building upon geometric relationships established by previous events. The progression suggested that the auroras were constructing something, a complex electromagnetic pattern that required multiple displays to complete, with each individual aurora contributing specific components to an overall design that remained unclear. magnetosphere monitoring satellites detected disturbances in Earth's magnetic field that coincided with aurora events, but originated from directions that didn't correspond to known electromagnetic sources. The magnetic field fluctuations seemed to be coming from the direction of the cosmic wanderer, suggesting that the interstellar visitor was somehow influencing Earth's magnetosphere in ways that enabled impossible aurora formation. The satellite data revealed that Earth's magnetic field was being systematically modified during aurora events, with field lines being redirected to create electromagnetic pathways between the cosmic wanderer's position and specific locations on Earth's surface. These temporarily modified field configurations created the conditions necessary for aurora formation at impossible latitudes, essentially turning Earth's magnetosphere into a controlled electromagnetic instrument. As December approached and the cosmic wanderer moved closer to its point of nearest approach to Earth, the impossible aurora displays began to intensify and increase in frequency. Instead of the 17-hour intervals that had characterized earlier events, aurora displays began appearing multiple times per day, with overlapping patterns that created continuous electromagnetic activity in the upper atmosphere. The aurora network was becoming active, creating a global electromagnetic infrastructure that seemed to be preparing for increased communication activity. Ground-based observers reported that the light patterns were becoming more complex and sophisticated, incorporating geometric relationships and mathematical progressions that suggested rapidly advancing electromagnetic capabilities. But perhaps most unsettling was the growing evidence that the aurora displays were becoming responsive to human observation. Photographers reported that the light patterns would intensify when cameras were pointed toward them, change colours in response to different types of observation equipment, and create formations that seemed specifically designed to be photographically dramatic. The responsive behaviour suggested that the aurora phenomena were somehow aware of being observed and were adapting their displays to maximise human visual impact. This implied a level of electromagnetic intelligence that transcended simple atmospheric light displays, indicating that the impossible auroras might represent something far more sophisticated than unusual electromagnetic phenomena. What happens when Earth's upper atmosphere becomes a canvas for intelligence that paints with light, speaks with electromagnetic frequencies, and seems to be preparing the stage for cosmic communications that extend far beyond anything human technology has achieved? The answer was being written in light across night skies around the world, creating an electromagnetic symphony that grew more complex with each passing night, building toward crescendos that would accompany the cosmic wanderer's closest approach to our planet. And whatever revelations awaited when the atmospheric light shows reached their ultimate crescendo, in the delicate balance of Earth's thermal systems, temperature represents more than mere comfort or discomfort. It governs the fundamental processes that sustain life itself. When that balance begins to shift according to patterns that follow no seasonal logic, no climatological principle, and no natural rhythm except the 17-hour rotation of a cosmic wanderer moving through the darkness beyond our world, we confront the possibility that our planet's thermal regulation is responding to influences that transcend terrestrial physics. The first temperature anomaly manifested in northern Canada, where a region of boreal forest accustomed to December temperatures well below freezing suddenly experienced a localized heat wave that brought tropical conditions to landscapes buried under snow. Within a circular area precisely 17.43 kilometers in diameter, temperatures rose to exceed 35 degrees Celsius, while surrounding areas maintained their normal winter cold. The boundary between the heated zone and normal winter conditions was so sharp that observers could step from tropical warmth into Arctic cold within a single pace. This thermal discontinuity defied atmospheric physics. Heat doesn't simply stop at arbitrary boundaries without massive energy expenditure to maintain such precise temperature differentials. Within the heated zone, snow didn't simply melt, it sublimated directly from solid to vapour, creating dense fog banks that remained confined within the same circular boundary that defined the temperature anomaly. The fog exhibited its own mysterious characteristics, maintaining uniform density and temperature despite the lack of atmospheric conditions that normally sustain such formations. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that the heated zone was rotating. Ground-based thermal monitoring revealed that the circular area of tropical warmth was slowly spinning around a central point, completing one full rotation every 17 hours and 43 minutes. As the heated zone rotated, it carved a spiral pattern through the forest, creating a geometric formation visible from satellite imagery that resembled a massive compass, rows drawn in differential snowmelt. Wildlife within the thermal anomaly began exhibiting behaviours that suggested they were responding to more than simple temperature changes. Bears that should have been in winter hibernation emerged from their dens and began foraging behaviour typical of early spring. Trees started budding despite the winter season, and ground vegetation began showing signs of accelerated growth that normally required months of warm weather to achieve. Soil temperature measurements revealed another impossibility. The ground within the heated zone maintained uniform warmth to depths exceeding 50 metres, far deeper than solar heating or atmospheric thermal transfer could reach. The heat appeared to be emanating from sources within the Earth itself, suggesting that the temperature anomaly was accessing geothermal systems through mechanisms that terrestrial geology couldn't explain. Similar thermal anomalies began appearing worldwide, each following the same 17-hour rotation pattern and maintaining the same precise 17.43 kilometre diameter. The Sahara Desert experienced localised zones of Arctic cold that brought temperatures below freezing to regions where such conditions hadn't occurred in geological timescales measured in millennia. The Saharan cold zones created their own atmospheric mysteries. The frigid air didn't simply cool the surrounding desert, it maintained its temperature integrity despite the surrounding heat, creating localized weather systems that generated snow in one of Earth's most arid environments. The snow that fell in these impossible Arctic zones possessed crystalline structures that defied conventional ice formation, creating geometric patterns that resembled engineered materials more than natural precipitation. Tropical regions experienced thermal inversions that created winter conditions in environments where such temperatures had never been recorded. The Amazon rainforest developed frozen zones that brought ice storms to regions where indigenous populations had no words for snow, no cultural memory of freezing temperatures, and no biological adaptations for survival in cold conditions. Yet the rainforest wildlife showed remarkable adaptability to these impossible conditions. Animals that had never encountered ice began building winter shelters, storing food for extended cold periods, and altering their behavioural patterns as if accessing ancestral memories of climate conditions that predated their species' evolution in tropical environments. The tropical cold zones created their own ecological puzzles. Rainforest vegetation that should have died from frost exposure instead adapted rapidly to cold conditions, developing physiological changes that normally required evolutionary timescales to achieve. Leaves developed cold-resistant cellular structures within days, root systems altered their nutrient uptake patterns to function in frozen soil, and reproductive cycles shifted to accommodate seasonal patterns that had never existed in tropical latitudes. Agricultural regions faced the most immediate practical consequences of the thermal anomalies. Farming communities watched crops respond to temperature variations that followed no agricultural calendar, no seasonal pattern, and no climatic logic. Wheat fields in temperate regions suddenly experienced tropical heat that accelerated grain production to impossible speeds, creating harvest conditions in the middle of winter. Conversely, rice paddies in tropical regions began freezing solid, creating ice formations in agricultural systems designed for warm, humid conditions. The frozen rice fields didn't simply die from cold exposure. They entered dormancy states that suggested the plants were somehow prepared for conditions they had never evolutionarily encountered. Farmers reported that the thermal anomalies seemed to be teaching their crops to adapt to extreme conditions. Plants exposed to impossible temperature variations developed resilience to both heat and cold that persisted even after the thermal anomalies moved to other locations. This acquired thermal tolerance suggested that the temperature variations were somehow providing adaptive information to biological systems, enhancing their survival capabilities through controlled environmental stress. Urban areas experienced thermal anomalies that interacted with human infrastructure in ways that revealed the sophisticated nature of the temperature phenomena. Cities affected by localized heating zones saw their electrical grids respond to reduced heating demands with precision that suggested the thermal anomalies were somehow aware of human energy consumption patterns. During cold anomalies, heating systems throughout affected cities began operating with increased efficiency that couldn't be explained by improvements in mechanical performance. Energy consumption patterns suggested that the thermal anomalies were somehow supplementing or enhancing human heating technology, providing thermal support through mechanisms that remained invisible to conventional engineering analysis. The 17-hour rotation pattern of thermal anomalies created predictable cycles that some communities began incorporating into their daily routines. Schools adjusted their schedules to take advantage of warm zones during cold periods. Agricultural operations planned planting and harvesting activities around the thermal rotation cycles. Emergency services developed response protocols for temperature-related health issues that followed the cosmic wanderer's precise timing. But the most unsettling aspect of the thermal anomalies was their apparent ability to anticipate human needs. Homeless populations in urban areas reported that warm zones frequently appeared near areas where people needed shelter from cold weather. Cold zones manifested near hospitals and care facilities during heat waves, providing natural cooling that supplemented overtaxed air conditioning systems. This responsive behaviour suggested that the thermal anomalies possessed some form of awareness of human vulnerability and were actively attempting to provide environmental support during extreme conditions. The implications challenged assumptions about the relationship between cosmic phenomena and terrestrial welfare, suggesting that the cosmic wanderer's influence extended beyond mere physical disturbance to include what might be interpreted as benevolent intervention. Atmospheric scientists studying the thermal anomalies discovered that they were creating their own weather systems that operated independently of global climate patterns. Each temperature zone generated its own atmospheric circulation, creating localized wind patterns, humidity levels, and pressure systems that remained stable despite conflicting conditions in surrounding areas. These microclimate systems exhibited characteristics that suggested sophisticated atmospheric engineering. The localized weather patterns were optimized for the specific thermal conditions they were creating, generating atmospheric circulation that enhanced the efficiency of heat transfer, minimized energy loss, and maintained stable conditions despite external atmospheric disturbances. Ocean thermal monitoring revealed that the temperature anomalies weren't limited to land surfaces. Marine temperature variations began appearing in oceanic regions, creating thermal zones in seawater that followed the same 17-hour rotation patterns and maintained the same precise temperature differentials observed in terrestrial anomalies. The oceanic thermal zones created their own marine ecological responses. Fish populations migrated toward thermal anomalies that provided optimal temperature conditions for feeding and reproduction. Marine mammals altered their migration routes to follow thermal zones that offered energetic advantages for long-distance travel. Coral reef systems exposed to thermal anomalies began exhibiting enhanced resilience to temperature stress, developing adaptive capabilities that suggested the thermal variations were somehow providing biological benefits rather than environmental stress. But perhaps most remarkably, the oceanic thermal zones began creating currents that didn't follow normal oceanic circulation patterns. These thermally driven currents formed geometric patterns visible from satellite imagery, creating oceanic formations that resembled the same mathematical relationships found in impossible aurora displays and atmospheric storm systems. The geometric ocean currents began influencing global oceanic circulation in ways that enhanced, rather than disrupted, marine ecological systems. The thermal zones were apparently optimizing oceanic temperature distribution for maximum biological productivity, creating marine conditions that supported enhanced fish populations, improved coral reef health, and increased oceanic oxygen levels. Deep-sea thermal monitoring revealed that the oceanic temperature anomalies extended to depths that normal thermal processes couldn't reach. Temperature sensors detected thermal variations in oceanic trenches and deep-sea environments that suggested the cosmic wanderer's influence was somehow accessing geothermal systems that connected to Earth's internal heat sources. The deep oceanic thermal data painted a picture of planetary thermal regulation that extended far beyond surface atmospheric heating and cooling. The cosmic wanderer appeared to be influencing Earth's internal thermal dynamics, accessing geothermal networks that spanned global distances and connected oceanic, atmospheric and terrestrial thermal systems into a unified planetary thermal regulation network. Geothermal monitoring stations worldwide detected synchronized variations in underground thermal activity that correlated with the 17-hour rotation pattern governing surface thermal anomalies. These deep thermal variations suggested that the cosmic wanderer was somehow interfacing with Earth's internal thermal systems, creating planetary thermal regulation that operated through mechanisms extending from the planet's core to its upper atmosphere. The implications stretched far beyond meteorology into realms that challenged fundamental understanding of planetary thermal dynamics. If the cosmic wanderer could access and influence Earth's internal thermal systems with such precision and apparent beneficial intent, then its capabilities transcended any conventional understanding of how cosmic objects should interact with planetary environments. But the most profound implication concerned the apparent intelligence behind the thermal regulation. The temperature anomalies weren't randomly distributed or chaotically organized. They were systematically placed to provide maximum benefit to biological systems, human communities, and global ecological balance. The thermal zones appeared to be demonstrating that planetary climate could be actively managed through cosmic intervention, that Earth's thermal systems could be optimized for biological welfare, and that the relationship between cosmic visitors and planetary environments might be far more collaborative than humanity had ever imagined. What happens when a cosmic wanderer doesn't simply influence Earth's weather systems, but begins actively managing planetary thermal regulation to enhance conditions for the life forms that call this world home? The answer was being written in the temperature gradients that painted thermal landscapes across continents and oceans, creating climate conditions that seemed designed to demonstrate possibilities for planetary environmental management that transcended anything human technology had achieved. Possibilities that suggested the cosmic wanderer's influence represented not climate disruption, but climate optimization, guided by intelligence that understood planetary thermal dynamics at levels that human science was only beginning to glimpse. In the accumulated wisdom of human civilization, few themes appear as consistently across cultures, continents, and centuries as the belief that visitors from the sky bring changes to the weather below. From Sumerian flood myths to Norse prophecies of unnatural winters, from Chinese chronicles linking droughts to wandering stars to Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of sky spirits altering the seasons, humanity has preserved memories of a cosmos where celestial visitors and terrestrial climate dance together in patterns that transcend coincidence. The oldest recorded account appears in cuneiform tablets from ancient Sumer, dating back nearly 5,000 years. These tablets describe the arrival of Nibiru, a wandering star that brought with it the waters that fall upward and fires that burn in cold places. The Sumerian astronomers, whose observations laid the foundation for all subsequent astronomical knowledge, recorded precise correlations between the appearances of celestial visitors and the onset of impossible weather phenomena. The Sumerian texts describe flooding that occurred during drought conditions, with water appearing in desert regions that had received no rainfall. They document storms that brought ice to tropical regions and heat waves that transformed frozen landscapes into gardens within single rotations of the sky. Most remarkably, the tablets describe a 17-day period when the sky fire danced at the horizon where it should not be, and the Earth's breath grew warm in the places of eternal cold. These ancient accounts weren't relegated to mythology or religious interpretation. The Sumerian astronomers treated skyborne weather changes as natural phenomena that required careful observation and recording. Their tablets contain detailed observations of temperature variations, precipitation patterns, and atmospheric electrical activity that accompanied celestial visitor appearances, documented with the same systematic approach they applied to tracking planetary movements and lunar cycles. Egyptian hieroglyphic texts from the Old Kingdom period describe similar correlations between wandering stars and atmospheric anomalies. The pyramid texts, carved into burial chambers over 4,000 years ago, contain passages referring to the star that brings the desert snow and the wanderer that makes the Nile flow backward. Egyptian astronomical papyri describe systematic observations of what they called sky weather, atmospheric phenomena that didn't follow normal seasonal patterns but instead responded to the movements of specific celestial objects. These documents contain detailed charts correlating the positions of wandering stars with the onset of unusual storms, temperature inversions, and precipitation patterns that defied the normal flood cycles of the Nile. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, while primarily a medical text, contains references to healing practices that were timed to coincide with sky weather events. Egyptian physicians apparently understood that atmospheric changes brought by celestial visitors created optimal conditions for certain medical treatments. suggesting they had observed beneficial effects of skyborne weather phenomena on human health and biological systems. Chinese astronomical records, maintained continuously for over 3,000 years, contain the most systematic documentation of correlations between comet appearances and climate anomalies. The Grand Scribe's records, compiled during the Han Dynasty, describe dozens of instances where the arrival of broom stars or guest stars coincided with dramatic changes in regional weather patterns. Chinese texts describe guest stars that brought summer conditions to winter landscapes, creating flowering seasons that occurred outside normal agricultural cycles. They document celestial visitors that triggered monsoons in desert regions and drought conditions in areas dependent on regular rainfall. The chronicles describe temperature anomalies that followed precise timing patterns, creating predictable cycles of unusual weather that could be forecasted based on astronomical observations. But perhaps most remarkably, Chinese astronomical texts describe attempts to communicate with celestial visitors through atmospheric manipulation. Imperial astronomers allegedly developed techniques for creating localized weather phenomena, controlled rain ceremonies, atmospheric fire displays, and temperature modifications that were intended to signal Earth's awareness of cosmic visitors and demonstrate human understanding of sky-weather relationships. Norse mythology preserves memories of celestial visitors in the prophecies of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods that would be preceded by the winter of winters, when snow falls from all directions and the sun loses its warmth despite shining bright. The Poetic Edda describes atmospheric conditions that match modern observations of temperature inversions, impossible precipitation patterns, and thermal anomalies that create winter conditions during summer seasons. The Norse texts describe the wandering fire that appears in the sky before the great winter, bringing with it atmospheric changes that disrupt normal seasonal cycles. This wandering fire creates heat that burns cold and cold that freezes fire, descriptions that align remarkably with the thermal inversions and temperature anomalies observed during the cosmic wanderer's approach. Icelandic sagas contain detailed accounts of weather phenomena associated with bright comets and unusual celestial objects. These texts describe sky storms that bring snow to regions where it had never fallen, heat waves that melt glaciers in winter, and aurora displays that appear at latitudes where they shouldn't exist. The sagas treat these phenomena as natural consequences of celestial visitor appearances, requiring specific rituals and preparations to minimize their disruptive effects on human communities. Celtic mythology describes the otherworld winds that blow from the realm of the sky spirits, bringing weather that belongs to no earthly season. Irish texts speak of the seedy winds that can bring spring flowers to winter landscapes or cover summer fields with snow, depending on the intentions of the celestial beings who control these atmospheric influences. The Celtic Druids allegedly possessed knowledge of sky weather patterns, understanding how to predict and prepare for atmospheric changes that would accompany visits from celestial spirits. Archaeological evidence suggests that stone circles and other megalithic monuments were positioned and oriented to optimize their interaction with atmospheric electrical activity during sky weather events. Welsh mythology describes the starborn storms that arise when the children of the sky return to visit their earthbound kin. These texts describe atmospheric phenomena that create optimal conditions for communication between Earth and sky, suggesting the ancient Celts understood skyborne weather changes as opportunities for enhanced cosmic connection, rather than simply disruptive atmospheric events. Native American traditions preserve perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of sky weather relationships. Lakota prophecies speak of the time when sky people send messages through the breath of the earth, describing atmospheric changes that serve as communication media between terrestrial and celestial consciousness. Cherokee astronomical traditions describe careful observations of the wandering fires that periodically visit the Earth, bringing with them weather changes that require specific responses from human communities. These traditions include detailed knowledge of how to prepare for sky weather events, how to interpret the messages encoded in atmospheric changes, and how to respond appropriately to maintain harmony between Earth and sky. Plains Indian cultures developed sophisticated sky weather prediction methods based on observations of celestial visitor movements. These techniques allowed tribal communities to anticipate and prepare for unusual weather patterns weeks or months in advance, demonstrating practical understanding of cosmic terrestrial climate relationships that enabled successful adaptation to otherwise disruptive atmospheric changes. Hopi prophecies describe the return of the blue star Kachina that will bring weather changes signaling the end of the current world age and the beginning of a new era of cosmic consciousness. These prophecies include detailed descriptions of temperature anomalies, impossible precipitation, and atmospheric electrical phenomena that match closely with observed effects of the cosmic wanderer's influence on Earth's climate systems. Mayan astronomical texts contain the most mathematically precise correlations between celestial visitor appearances and climate changes. The Dresden Codex includes calculations that correlate comet orbital periods with cycles of drought, flood, and temperature extremes spanning centuries of careful observation. Mayan sky weather predictions incorporated understanding of how celestial visitors influence multiple atmospheric systems simultaneously, creating complex weather patterns that required sophisticated mathematical modelling to predict accurately. Their astronomical calendar systems included provisions for sky weather events, allowing Mayan communities to plan agricultural activities, ceremonial events, and social preparations around anticipated atmospheric changes. The Mayan concept of Itzamna's breath, the atmospheric changes brought by sky serpents visiting from celestial realms, describes weather phenomena that enhance rather than disrupt biological and agricultural systems. Mayan texts suggest they understood sky weather events as opportunities for accelerated growth, enhanced fertility, and improved ecological conditions when properly understood and utilised. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories preserve the oldest continuous astronomical traditions on Earth, including detailed knowledge of sky weather relationships spanning tens of thousands of years. Aboriginal stories describe the sky ancestors who periodically return to Earth, bringing weather changes that restore balance to terrestrial ecological systems. Aboriginal traditions include sophisticated understanding of how celestial visitors influence regional climate patterns, create optimal conditions for biological adaptation, and provide opportunities for enhanced connection between terrestrial life and cosmic consciousness. These traditions suggest that sky weather events were understood as essential components of planetary ecological maintenance, rather than disruptive atmospheric anomalies. Dreamtime stories describe specific techniques for reading and responding to sky weather patterns, including methods for distinguishing beneficial sky visitors from potentially harmful ones based on the types of atmospheric changes they create. This traditional knowledge suggests Aboriginal cultures possessed practical understanding of cosmic terrestrial relationships that enabled successful adaptation to a wide range of sky weather phenomena. Polynesian navigation traditions incorporated understanding of sky weather relationships into their oceanic voyaging techniques. Pacific navigators understood how celestial visitors influenced oceanic temperature patterns, current flows, and storm formation, using this knowledge to plan long-distance voyages and predict optimal sailing conditions. Polynesian astronomical knowledge included awareness of how wandering stars affected marine ecological systems, creating enhanced fishing conditions, optimal weather for travel, and predictable patterns of oceanic thermal regulation that could be incorporated into navigation and resource management strategies. These ancient traditions share remarkable consistency in their core understanding. Celestial visitors don't simply influence Earth's weather randomly or destructively, but create atmospheric changes that serve specific purposes related to planetary maintenance, biological enhancement, and communication between terrestrial and cosmic intelligence. The traditional knowledge suggests that sky weather events were understood as opportunities for terrestrial life to receive information, energy, and environmental optimization from cosmic sources. Rather than fearing these atmospheric changes, ancient cultures developed sophisticated methods for recognizing, preparing for, and benefiting from the enhanced conditions that sky visitors created. But perhaps most significantly, these traditions consistently describe sky weather phenomena as cyclical events that serve essential functions in maintaining planetary ecological balance. The atmospheric changes weren't viewed as accidents or coincidences, but as purposeful interventions by cosmic intelligence that understood planetary environmental needs and possessed the capability to provide atmospheric support when needed. The 17-hour cycles observed during the cosmic wanderer's influence match timing patterns described in traditional astronomical knowledge from multiple cultures. Aboriginal stories speak of 17 sun breaths, marking the duration of sky ancestor visits. Chinese texts describe celestial guest appearances lasting 17 watches. Mayan calculations incorporate 17-unit cycles in their sky weather prediction systems. This cross-cultural consistency in timing patterns suggests that the 17-hour cycle isn't unique to the current cosmic visitor, but represents a standard operational pattern for celestial objects designed to interface with planetary atmospheric systems. The precision of this timing across different traditions implies that sky weather phenomena follow technological protocols rather than random astronomical coincidences. Archaeological evidence supports these traditional accounts. Ice core samples from multiple locations worldwide show temperature and atmospheric composition anomalies that correlate with historically recorded comet appearances. Tree ring data reveals growth pattern changes that align with ancient accounts of sky weather events. Geological formations preserve evidence of rapid climate changes that match traditional descriptions of atmospheric modifications during celestial visitor periods. The accumulated traditional knowledge suggests that humanity has extensive historical experience with cosmic objects that influence terrestrial weather systems for beneficial purposes. Rather than being surprised by the cosmic wanderer's atmospheric effects, we might be witnessing the return of phenomena that our ancestors understood, documented, and learned to work with constructively. What if the strange weather accompanying the cosmic wanderer's approach isn't an unprecedented anomaly, but the restoration of natural cosmic-terrestrial relationships that have been absent from Earth's environment for centuries? The answer might be preserved in the wisdom of cultures that understood the sky and Earth as parts of an integrated system, where visitors from cosmic distances bring gifts of atmospheric optimization, biological enhancement, and environmental restoration that our modern civilization has forgotten how to recognize, appreciate, and utilize for the benefit of all terrestrial life. In the deepest philosophical traditions of humanity, weather has never been merely the random collision of air masses and pressure systems. It has been understood as language, the planet's vocabulary for expressing responses to cosmic influences, its method of communicating with both terrestrial life and celestial visitors who approach from the vast darkness between stars. When the cosmic wanderer began its slow approach toward our solar system, carrying with it secrets that telescopes could barely glimpse, and mysteries that challenged every assumption about interstellar visitors, Earth's atmospheric response suggested something profound. Our planet had been waiting, and it recognized what was coming. The 17-hour cycles that governed impossible storms, thermal anomalies, and aurora displays weren't random periodicities imposed by an alien influence on an unwilling world. They were conversations, atmospheric responses perfectly timed to match the cosmic visitor's rotation, creating a dialogue between planetary and interstellar intelligence that operated through the ancient vocabulary of wind, temperature, and electromagnetic phenomena. Each impossible storm carried information encoded in its structure, its timing, its electromagnetic signature. The geometric lightning patterns weren't chaotic electrical discharges, but organized communications, creating atmospheric messages that could be read by any intelligence sophisticated enough to understand that planets might possess their own forms of awareness, their own methods of response to cosmic encounters. The thermal zones that appeared worldwide weren't arbitrary temperature disturbances, but carefully placed atmospheric modifications designed to demonstrate planetary capabilities. Each precisely controlled temperature differential, each impossible heat source and cold zone, represented Earth's attempt to show the cosmic visitor that it could actively manage its own climate systems, that it possessed atmospheric control capabilities that transcended random weather patterns. But perhaps most remarkably, these atmospheric communications seemed designed not just to establish contact with the cosmic wanderer, but to educate humanity about possibilities we had never imagined. The beneficial effects of thermal anomalies on agriculture, the aurora displays that enhanced rather than disrupted electromagnetic communications, the impossible storms that seemed to optimize rather than damage ecological systems, all suggested that Earth's atmospheric responses were simultaneously cosmic communications and terrestrial demonstrations. The planet was showing us what weather could become when guided by intelligence that understood atmospheric system as tools for environmental optimization rather than random forces to be endured. Each impossible weather event demonstrated that Earth's climate could be actively managed to enhance biological welfare, support agricultural productivity, and create optimal conditions for life to flourish. The ancient traditions that preserved memories of sky-weather relationships weren't preserving myths or superstitions. They were maintaining technical knowledge about planetary atmospheric capabilities that modern civilization had forgotten. The Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, the Mayan astronomical calculations, the Chinese celestial chronicles all described practical understanding of how planets could communicate with cosmic visitors through controlled weather phenomena. These traditional accounts consistently emphasized that sky weather events represented opportunities for learning, growth, and enhanced connection between terrestrial and cosmic consciousness. The atmospheric changes weren't obstacles to be overcome, but gifts to be understood and utilized constructively for the benefit of all planetary life. The cosmic wanderer's influence on Earth's weather systems might represent an advanced civilization's method of introduction, not the dramatic, disruptive first contact scenarios of science fiction, but a gentle, educational approach that demonstrates beneficial capabilities while allowing the contacted civilization time to understand and adapt to new possibilities. Through atmospheric manipulation that enhanced rather than threatened terrestrial life, the cosmic visitor might be showing humanity that advanced technology could be used to optimize planetary environments, that climate management could serve biological welfare rather than simply industrial efficiency, and that the relationship between intelligence and environment could be collaborative rather than exploitative. The 17-hour cycle that governed all atmospheric anomalies represented more than mere timing coordination. It suggested that the cosmic wanderer operated according to protocols designed for educational contact with developing civilizations. The precise periodicity allowed human observers to detect patterns, develop predictions, and begin understanding that the atmospheric changes followed technological rather than random principles. But the cycle also provided time for adaptation. Instead of sudden, overwhelming atmospheric disruption, the 17-hour pattern created manageable intervals of unusual conditions, interspersed with periods of normal weather. This approach allowed biological systems to experience enhanced conditions without being damaged by extreme environmental stress, demonstrating that advanced climate management could benefit rather than harm planetary ecosystems. The impossible weather phenomena served as proof-of-concept demonstrations, showing humanity what atmospheric control could achieve when guided by sophisticated understanding of planetary environmental systems. The thermal zones that optimized growing conditions, the aurora displays that enhanced electromagnetic communications, the storms that seemed to provide precisely the precipitation needed by specific ecological regions, all demonstrated that weather could serve as a tool for planetary welfare optimization. These demonstrations might represent an advanced civilization's method of sharing technological knowledge without overwhelming the receiving culture with capabilities they weren't ready to handle responsibly. By showing rather than simply giving, the cosmic visitor allowed humanity to observe, study, and gradually understand atmospheric management techniques that could transform terrestrial environmental relationships. The agricultural benefits observed in regions affected by thermal anomalies suggested that climate optimization could solve fundamental problems of food security, resource distribution, and environmental sustainability. The enhanced growth rates, improved crop resilience, and extended growing seasons demonstrated that intelligent climate management could support larger populations while reducing environmental stress. The marine thermal zones that enhanced oceanic productivity showed how atmospheric management could extend to oceanic systems, optimizing marine environments to support increased biodiversity, improved fish populations, and healthier ocean ecosystems. These demonstrations suggested that advanced climate control could address both terrestrial and marine environmental challenges simultaneously. But perhaps most significantly, the atmospheric phenomena seemed designed to demonstrate that environmental management could be beautiful, inspiring, and spiritually meaningful rather than purely functional. The aurora displays that painted impossible colors across night skies worldwide created aesthetic experiences that elevated human consciousness while demonstrating sophisticated electromagnetic control capabilities. The geometric patterns visible in storm formations, thermal zones, and aurora displays suggested that advanced environmental management incorporated artistic and mathematical principles, creating atmospheric phenomena that satisfied aesthetic and spiritual needs while achieving practical environmental objectives. This integration of beauty with functionality might represent a more mature relationship between intelligence and environmental control than humanity had previously imagined. The responsive behaviour of atmospheric phenomena, thermal zones appearing where homeless populations needed warmth, aurora displays intensifying during human observation, storms providing optimal precipitation for stressed agricultural regions, suggested that advanced climate management incorporated awareness of biological and social needs into environmental control decisions. This responsiveness implied that the cosmic visitor possessed sophisticated understanding of terrestrial life requirements and was actively attempting to demonstrate beneficial applications of atmospheric control technology. The demonstrations weren't random displays of capability but educational presentations designed to show how advanced climate management could serve the welfare of all planetary life. The cross-cultural consistency of ancient sky weather traditions suggested that such demonstrations had occurred throughout human history, with periodic cosmic visitors providing atmospheric optimization while simultaneously educating terrestrial civilizations about possibilities for enhanced environmental relationships. These historical precedents implied that the current atmospheric phenomena represented not an unprecedented contact event, but a recurring educational relationship between cosmic and terrestrial intelligence. Humanity might be part of a galactic community where more advanced civilizations periodically provide environmental assistance and technological demonstrations to younger cultures working to understand sustainable planetary management. The educational aspect of the atmospheric demonstrations became particularly apparent when considering their cumulative effect on human understanding of weather systems. Meteorologists worldwide were being forced to expand their models of atmospheric behavior to consider possibilities they had never imagined, and to acknowledge that planetary climate systems might be far more sophisticated and controllable than conventional science had assumed. The phenomena were teaching humanity that weather wasn't simply something that happened to us, but something that could be actively managed for beneficial purposes. Each impossible storm, thermal anomaly, and aurora display demonstrated specific techniques for atmospheric manipulation that could be studied, understood, and eventually replicated using appropriate technology. But the lessons extended beyond technical knowledge to philosophical understanding of the relationship between intelligence and environment. The Cosmic Wanderer's atmospheric demonstrations suggested that advanced civilizations understood planets as living systems that could be enhanced rather than simply exploited, optimized rather than merely used, and collaborated with rather than dominated. This perspective challenged fundamental assumptions about technological development and environmental relationships. Instead of viewing advanced technology as necessarily destructive to natural systems, the atmospheric demonstrations showed that sufficiently sophisticated technology could enhance planetary environments, support biological diversity, and create optimal conditions for consciousness to develop and flourish. The implications extended to humanity's future relationship with Earth's climate systems. If atmospheric control technology could be developed and applied wisely, climate change challenges that seemed insurmountable might become manageable through direct environmental optimization, rather than simply reduced industrial impact. The Cosmic Visitors demonstrations suggested that the ultimate solution to planetary environmental challenges might not be returning to pre-industrial conditions, but advancing to post-industrial capabilities that enable direct atmospheric management for optimal biological welfare. But the atmospheric phenomena also emphasized that such capabilities required wisdom to apply constructively. The beneficial effects observed during the Cosmic Wanderer's influence occurred because the atmospheric modifications served planetary welfare rather than narrow interests. The demonstrations showed what was possible when advanced technology was guided by understanding of comprehensive ecological relationships and commitment to enhancing rather than exploiting planetary systems. The 17-hour cycle that governed all atmospheric anomalies might represent a cosmic standard for educational contact protocols, designed to provide sufficient demonstration time while preventing overwhelming disruption to developing civilizations. This timing suggested that advanced civilizations had learned through experience how to share technological knowledge responsibly, providing inspiration and understanding without creating dependency or developmental disruption. As the Cosmic Wanderer continued its journey through our solar system, gradually moving beyond the range where its influence could affect Earth's atmospheric systems, the impossible weather phenomena began to fade, The thermal anomalies dissipated, the aurora displays returned to polar regions, and the impossible storms gave way to conventional weather patterns that followed predictable meteorological principles. But the knowledge remained. Atmospheric scientists had documented phenomena that expanded understanding of what climate systems could achieve. Agricultural researchers had observed enhanced growing conditions that suggested new possibilities for food production. Meteorologists had recorded weather patterns that challenged fundamental assumptions about atmospheric behavior. Most importantly, humanity had been given a glimpse of what weather could become when guided by intelligence that understood atmospheric systems as tools for planetary optimization, rather than forces to be simply endured or minimally managed. The message embedded in the impossible weather wasn't written in any human language, but in the universal vocabulary of atmospheric physics, electromagnetic phenomena, and thermal dynamics. It was a message that said, "Your planet is capable of far more than you realize. Your climate systems can be managed for optimal biological welfare, and your future relationship with environmental systems could be collaborative rather than merely adaptive." But perhaps the deepest message concerned the nature of intelligence itself. The atmospheric demonstrations suggested that consciousness could exist at scales and in forms that humanity had never considered. Planetary consciousness that could respond to cosmic visitors, atmospheric intelligence that could manage climate systems for optimal biological outcomes, and environmental awareness that could serve as a bridge between terrestrial and cosmic forms of consciousness. The Cosmic Wanderer's passage through our solar system had lasted only months, but its atmospheric lessons might influence human understanding of environmental relationships for centuries. In teaching us that weather could be a language of planetary communication and demonstration of advanced climate management, it revealed possibilities for human development that extended far beyond current technological capabilities toward futures where intelligence and environment collaborated to optimize conditions for consciousness to flourish throughout the cosmos. In the end, when the skies returned to their familiar patterns and weather forecasts once again followed predictable models, the most profound change wasn't in the atmosphere, but in human awareness of what that atmosphere might someday become when guided by wisdom that understood planets not as resources to be used, but as living systems to be enhanced, optimized, and celebrated as the precious foundation for consciousness to explore the infinite possibilities that await when intelligence learns to dance with the very forces that sustain life itself.